The first area that I want to talk about is growth strategy. And I really think in a franchise discussion that's one of the earliest topics you need to address. What is your growth strategy? And these are not mutually exclusive. They can flow back and forth. Many franchisors start out with a single site model. It is still the predominant model out there, selling individual franchise rights to one party under very specific circumstances. It provides for a very high-touch approach. Many franchisors start out this way so that they can have very good control and input on the growth of their concept. And yet over time, they can morph, if you will, or expand into other areas. What you need to think about are your financial goals, especially if you're thinking about buying a franchise. You really need to determine if a single site model will provide you with the financial return that you're looking for. So the next iteration of growth strategy is multi-site. You operate a site individually, but then find that you're good at it, you're successful at it, and you want to invest in opening an additional site. And most franchisors will allow you to expand if there's space available. They may even have discounts in the franchise fee, but certainly thinking about this in advance and knowing and planning for it is certainly important. As a matter of fact, if there's any inclination on your part to think about multiple sites, it's best to talk about that, negotiate, and plan for that on the front end. This is a very powerful model, having multi-unit operators. Again, the process of selling a franchise is fairly competitive. Over 2,000 franchisors are out there in the market today trying to sell franchises. It is more competitive than it's ever been. The franchisee is in a better position today to negotiate franchise relationships than they ever have been. So the things you need to think about if you're going to look at a multi-site is, can you manage multiple sites? From a franchisor perspective, is the person buying the franchise capable of managing multiple sites? What's the makeup of the franchise system to support multi-site operators? And again, what does the future look like? One of the most rapidly growing areas in the franchise sector is area development rights. And this is attracting more investors to the marketplace. When you think about the single site model, it's really attractive to the individual owner/operator, someone who's going to be integrally involved in the day-to-day operation of the business. The multi-site attracts more of your management type, folks that might not be as fulfilled, either financially or occupationally, operating one site, but managing multiple sites. They may have the skill sets, and so it's attracting a manager candidate. So many franchise companies are now offering structured area development rights. This is not a franchise agreement. It's simply a contract to develop franchise activity in a market. Okay, so it may be that the area developer operates the sites themselves like an owner would, but more realistically, they're going to hire a team. They're going to hire a group that's going to actually operate the sites. Or they may, in some situations, actually have the right to bring in individual franchisees under a site model. So there's a lot of variations in this area development concept out there, but it is an area that for high worth individuals and the investors that is growing. All right, the second building block we need to look at is operations. And this is the nuts and bolts. When you look at a franchise system or you're going to launch a franchise system, this is where you have to look at the documentation. Anything the franchisor does not define, the franchisee will during the course of operating the business. So franchisors take a lot of care and concern when defining their concept through their operating manuals and through some other documents to ensure that their brand is consistently offered. So when you're looking at a franchise system, some are more defined than others. Some offer more independence for an operator than others. So depending on your makeup, depending on your preference, you may want to find a franchise concept that fits. Operationally, there's two platforms to think about. Do you want to be in a fixed location, in a retail type business? It doesn't even have to be retail, but if there's a fixed location involved, it's a lot more involved to create the franchise and to manage the franchise, defining where the site can be, what does it look like, what kind of signage, how is it built out, what's the interior like, how does it operate. That's a lot of detail that's got to be added to the franchise description. The service side, which is rapidly growing in the franchise sector, typically does not require a fixed location, at least customer facing, and so it can be a less involved franchise relationship and detail, and certainly can be easier to operate. Retail, just some things that you need to think about. Site selection. In my 20-some years of experience, most people don't have an inherent capability to make good decisions about sites. And yet I can tell you unequivocally that site is probably the most important factor in your ultimate success or failure with a site-based franchise. Lease negotiation. How many of you have negotiated retail leases? You know, again, in my experience, most folks who buy a franchise have very little, if any, experience negotiating retail leases, which is certainly a specialty. Construction, signage, there's just a lot more complexity when you look at a fixed location site. The franchisor provides guidance, but the franchisor has a vested interest in providing you guidance. I can't stress enough how important it is to have independent third-party input when you're thinking about some of these different elements in a retail site. Service providers. This is more about the customer engagement. Franchisors spend a lot of time in a franchise that's a service-based franchise talking about how we get customers, how we engage customers, how we support customers, how we deal with it. So it's a lot more focused on the customer engagement. The things to look at in the operational side, the manuals. What kind of manuals do they have and how detailed they are? Information systems. Technology is critically important. All right, let's go to the third building block, which is the franchise systems and support. What are the systems that underpin this franchise? As you may find as you're out there, there's a lot of attention given to selling franchises. When you look at a franchisor, they have a lot of infrastructure and support around finding and signing franchisees. And you got to get past that courting and look behind the scenes and say, okay, that's on the front end. That's going to last 90 days, 180 days. I'm going to be in this agreement for 10 years. How are they going to support me? You've got to look at those underpinnings very carefully and make sure that they're not overly focused on selling franchises, but equally, if not more, focused on supporting existing franchisees. The franchise launch, how are they going to get you up and running? Again, all the surveying that I've seen, it's a big letdown after you sign the franchise agreement. Between the 90 and 180 days it takes to get you up and running, there tends to be a lot of buyer's remorse in there. How does the franchisor address that? How will you as a franchisor address that? Building the business. Once they're up and running, how do you get them to sustainability? You know, if you think about a business, how long does it last in America today? You know, what's the business failure rate? It's critical franchisors support franchisees during that first year to get them to sustainability. And then on ongoing operations, it's really about continuing education and support. Some of the areas of support, back office, do they offer accounting or are you on your own? Call center, or do you answer the phone and deal with customers? Warehousing, procurement, the advertising and promotion side. Do they have field offices? Are people going to come out and visit you, or are you going to have to go to the franchisor? Periodic gatherings. Many franchisors offer opportunities for networking among franchisees. These are some of the elements that you can look into, or if you're thinking about franchising, you've got to build. At the end of the day, it's about the relationship. You know, you as a franchisee are busy running the business every day. What do you want the franchisor to be doing? And if you're the franchisor, you don't want to be out there running the franchisee's business. That's why you franchise, is to push that down locally. So what should the franchisor be focused on, and what should you be looking for from the franchisor? Knowledge transfer and system development. Relationship, I can't stress this enough. If you're a franchisor building a system, how is your relationship going to be conveyed to the franchisee? Think about that. Make sure it's evident. If you're a prospect looking at franchising, that's the most important thing in my opinion is who are you getting into business with and what are they likely to be like as a partner long term. How do you leverage franchise power? It's unique, I think, in franchising, but it all has to do with scale. You're having shared risk. You don't want to have to reinvent the wheel. Whatever franchise you buy, the franchisor has always already thought about all the trial and error and how to make it work. Buy into that, focus on it. There's ongoing learning once you're in a franchise system. It's very associative in nature. You're association, learning from each other, the R&D that goes on. Liquidity. If you buy a franchise and operate it successfully, the resale value statistically should be higher than if you own and operate your own business. And there's economy of scale in a franchise. The most important thing I would tell you about becoming a franchisee is leverage your biggest asset, and that is your local sphere of influence. You are going to know more about the local market than the franchisor.